All right, come on. We're going to be in the book of Ezekiel today. There's a sermon series we're going to do just for a couple weeks here called The Valley of Resurrection. I want to talk to you today about the power of God to bring life out of dead places, the power of God to redeem and to restore, and a God who's not simply distant, a God who's not far away, a God who's not uncaring, but a God who is risen and alive and moving in our lives. Now, in this story here, we're going to be looking at Ezekiel 36 and 37. The story doesn't start out so good. And you see, this is good news for people like me who get off track along the way. It's good news for people like me and probably like you who've made some mistakes along the way, who haven't always had their story on track. And the good news is that you and I serve a God who is not only getting us started, but actually carries us all the way through to the end. So we're going to start here, Ezekiel 36:24. You'll see the verses on the screen. We're going to read a little bit of a longer passage today, but I really feel in my heart that we should read the whole thing. So Ezekiel 36:24, God says to the people of Israel, he says, I will take you out of the nations, and I will gather you from all the countries, and bring you back into your own land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and your idols. I will give you a new heart, and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone, and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. We're going to pick up the story in chapter 37, verse 1. Ezekiel says, the hand of Yahweh, that's the name of God, was on me. And he brought me out by the Spirit of Yahweh and set me in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Lord Yahweh, you alone know. If God asks you a question and you don't know the answer, just say, God, you know. Always a safe bet. Always a safe bet. Verse 4, then he said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. This is what the Lord Yahweh says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come back to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am Yahweh. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say to it, this is what the Lord Yahweh says. Come, breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Final few verses here, verse 11. And he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, our hope is gone, and we are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the Lord Yahweh says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am Yahweh when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, Yahweh, have spoken, and I have done it, declares Yahweh. Okay, so that's kind of a longer passage than we usually read. Some of you, maybe you've heard this, you're tracking with me. Some of you are like, Joey, what is happening in this story? So it's a pretty cool story here. The story opens up with this prophecy where God tells Ezekiel that he's going to take people who are dead in sin, these people of Israel. They're cut off from God, cut off from the life of God. And God's going to send his spirit. And then there's this scene change where Ezekiel has this crazy vision, And if you've ever read Ezekiel, he always has these like wild, outlandish kind of visions. And he sees basically this cemetery, this graveyard. It's just full of bones. And it's this crazy thing that happens where the Spirit of God comes and these bones become this army. And it's this picture, God says, of spiritual life that's cut off from God. People who are dead, who are dry, who have no life inside of them. And God is going to bring them up out of their graves. Now, the reason this story carries such power is because it reveals to us what kind of God we serve. This is not simply a God who did things for some people, for some Israelites a long time ago, but this is the kind of God that we serve. And the reason this speaks to many of us, and the reason it speaks to me, is because I know about dry bones. Chances are, if you're like me, you know about dry bones. You know what it's like to feel empty, to feel hollow, to feel like there's no life, there's no strength, that you don't know what to do, you don't know how to move on, and it feels like there's this emptiness, there's this void. And there's this sense of like where, maybe you're trying to do the right things and you're not sure what to do and you don't know how to fix it and we don't know how to solve the problems that are happening in this world. We know what it's like. We know what it's like to feel the dryness, to feel the emptiness, to feel like, where is God? If God is who he says he is, then why am I in a valley of dry bones? Why am I in this dead and dry valley where there's no hope, where there's no life? And it's not just things out there in the world, even though we almost had World War III break out this week. We had midterms a couple weeks ago, right? We know what it's like to be anxious about the world or about our nation, but it's not just out there. We feel it inside. We feel it within our families and our businesses, and we're anxious about what's happening within us and within the church. We look out and we see the dry bones. And the thing about the dry bones is that, you see, it's too late for medical intervention. This isn't like somebody who just had a heart attack and we can bring them back. This is like it's gone. And the thing about dry bones is that it feels like there's a finality, there's a completeness. The time for redemption is past. The time for healing in life is past. And this is a message for people today who feel like the book's already been closed, it's too late, there was a moment for a breakthrough and it didn't happen, and now I'm just in this place of dry bones. And the thing about this story is that it reveals to us a God who kind of specializes in dry bones. Believe it or not, dry bones are kind of his thing. And that's really good news. For people who feel like, well, Joey, maybe God could have done something or he could have moved and there's this thing that happened. Maybe you did something. Maybe something happened to you and we're familiar with dry bones. We're familiar with what happens when sin gets in the way, when the world gets in the way, when the enemy gets in the way. And we don't know what to do. We don't know how to move. And this is a God who is really, really good at taking dead things and making them living things. G.K. Chesterton says this: Christianity has died many times and risen again, for it has a God who knew his way out of the grave. See, when you and I see the dry bones, we look out, right? We look out on the valley and we see the dry bones. And we're like, Joey, you're talking about this hope and this life and this peace, but I'm looking out and I'm seeing dry bones. And there's this sense of like, where's the hope when you look out and it's just bones? Where's the hope? Where's the peace? Where's the life? And the beauty of this story is that it tells us this is exactly what God does. And not only on the macro scale, but on the personal scale. There's many times in my life, areas of my heart and mind that have died and risen again because I have a God who has defeated the grave. It's what he does. And so if I can speak prophetically here for a moment to the church, I believe we are in a moment of death and rebirth. I believe we are in a moment of God putting aside the old way, the old heart, the old nature, and there is a resurrection that's coming. Not only to Jesus' church on a local or national or global scale, but on an intimate level. And I don't know about you, but I could use a little bit of resurrection in my life. So here in this story, I want to reread verse 25 of chapter 36 to you. He says, I will sprinkle clean water. You will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols. Now here's the thing about the dry bones. The cause for the people of Israel in this situation was the idols, the impurities, the sin. And I want to tell you here, in no uncertain terms, that sin always leads to death. And I know this isn't like, I know, some of you are like, I'm not feeling encouraged, Joey. I get it. This is not the shouty kind of exciting kind of stuff. But here's the thing. Sin always leads to death. There's no way around it. And the thing is, we have this generation of pastors that doesn't want to speak against sin because we don't want to offend the dry bones. And I want to tell you here, you cannot step into the life that God has for you if you're separating yourself from God, who is the source of life. And I know it's not popular to preach against sin, and I know it's not comfortable and we don't like it. We want someone who would just make us feel good, but I want to tell you here, telling dry bones they can stay dead is not good news. Now on the flip side, we have other pastors who preach about sin in such a way that all they do is beat people over the head and they come across as self-righteous. And I don't want to be that kind of preacher either, because the truth is, the solution to dry bones becoming alive again is not trying harder. You can't make yourself come to life any more than dry bones in a cemetery can make themselves come to life. So here's what I'm saying. Yes, we need to separate ourselves from sin, remove the idols, but here's the thing. This is not about you and I just doing more, you and I just trying harder. The thing about this story is that it tells us that God himself steps in to make us new. Here's what it says in verse 26. I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. See, here's what I love about this. Two things I want you to know without any mistake, no doubts about it. Sin leads to death. Number one. Number two, we have a God who raises the dead. That when you and I were dead in sin, dead in the grave, God poured out his Spirit and brought us to life again. And if you're not a believer, you're not a follower of Jesus in this room, let me tell you, those of us who are followers of Jesus, we're not better than anybody else. I'm not who I am because I've done everything right or because I followed all the rules. I'm somebody who was dead in the grave, who was brought to new life through the Spirit of God. And I want you to see this here. The primary catalyst for resurrection is the Spirit. That's what we see in this passage. It's not dry bones trying harder. It's not dry bones working themselves up to get all excited. It's dry bones that have come in contact with the life of God's very own Spirit. And the word for spirit in this passage was written in Hebrew. It's the word ruach, and you'll see it on the screen here. There's three different English words that we have for this Hebrew word ruach. It means breath or spirit or wind. And the thing is, in our English translation, we actually see all three of these words. But in the Hebrew, it's only the one word. See, in ancient languages, they usually had fewer words for things. And so as modern people, we can be more precise with more words. The problem is when we read a text like Hebrew, the author, Ezekiel here, he's using this one word with all these ranges of meaning. So he talks about the Spirit bringing him to the valley and the wind coming, the four winds coming and breath entering people. And so there's this idea here that we have that the Ruah, the breath of God, the wind of God, is nothing less than God himself. And so what happens is Ezekiel, he finds himself in the valley. He looks out on dry bones, of which you and I are all too familiar. And what happens, Ezekiel has this moment with the Spirit of God, with the wind of God, and new life is breathed into these dry bones, not because they deserved it, not because they had it all together, completely through the grace and love of God's Spirit. And if you've read earlier in the Bible, like in the book of Genesis, we see that this is the same breath, same wind that was breathed into Adam and Eve in the very beginning. That God breathed new life into Adam and Eve, and the beauty of that is, this is not a one and done kind of God. This is not a God who said, well, I gave you some breath, I gave you spirit, I gave you my wind back then, but now you messed it up. But now you blew it. You see, that's not the kind of God that we have. That this is the kind of God who, when he looks out on a valley of dry bones, he doesn't say, well, you had your chance. He says, I will once again step in and give you my Spirit and bring you to life again. This is the kind of God that we serve. Chapter 37, verses 9 and 10 says, Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say to it, this is what the Lord Yahweh says. Come, breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me. And breath entered them, and they came to life, and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Here's what I want you to see here. When God's Ruah comes, death gives way to life. And I want you to see there's no struggle. There's no competition. The dry bones don't push back. When the wind of God's Spirit comes, things change. And there's no dry bone that he can't bring to life. There's no dead body that he can't raise. There's no situation that's too dark, that's too far. It's bad, too much time has passed. So many things have happened that are outside of God's control. When the wind of God's Spirit comes, dry bones come to life. And you see, this is what God is offering us. He doesn't just want you to sing a few songs on Sundays. He doesn't want you just to do a few things, a few external behaviors. He wants to give you his very own life, his very own Spirit. This is not just, I want to dust you off and clean you up a little bit. You see, that's what religion wants to do. It wants to organize the dry bones so they look really decent in the cemetery. And for too long in the church, we've been putting Band-Aids on dry bones, and what we need is life. What we need is breath. What we need is Spirit. Church, there's no substitute for the Ruach of God. For the breath of God, the wind of God that can blow on our dry bones. This is what the Lord offers us. This is what God, the King, Yahweh, creator of heaven and earth, that's what he gives. He doesn't just give you a few rules, give you a few little things to get through the day. He's not offering you a few little blessings. He's offering you a resurrected life. He's offering you a new heart that he says, I'll take your heart of stone and I'll make it a heart of flesh. And you see, when that happens, you don't need some preacher to beat you over the head with holiness every week and guilt you into not sinning. When you have a new heart, you change your life, not because you have to, but because you want to. Because you're tired of being dry bones. You're tired of being hollow and empty inside. And so when the wind of God begins to come, and the wind of God, the life of God's very own Spirit begins to be deposited inside of us, these dry bones come to life. That's what he offers us, a brand new life. Now we're gonna close here in a few moments, and we're gonna go back into a little bit of worship here. So I want the worship team to come. But I have a couple more thoughts for you here just as we close. I believe right now, in this moment that we're in, don't worry about them, they're fine. They're fine. I believe we're in a moment in the church. I believe we're in a moment as City Alive. And I believe we're in a moment personally where God is taking the darkness, he's taking the bones, he's taking the mess, he's taking what you and I thought was too late to change, and he's breathing his life and his wind inside of us. And you see, the reason that I'm calling this sermon and this series the Valley of Resurrection instead of the Valley of Dry Bones is because for too long in the church, we define ourselves by our past. We define ourselves by our issues. My whole life I was taught this is the Valley of Dry Bones. In fact, in your Bible, you probably have a heading that says Valley of Dry Bones. Guess what? Your Bible didn't come with headings. That was added to help us out when we don't know what we're reading. But here's the thing. It used to be the Valley of Dry Bones, but it's not anymore. And I have a feeling for many people here, the Spirit of God has done something in your life, and you're still defining yourself based on who you were. You're still defining yourself as the dry bones instead of as the Valley of Resurrection. And I believe right now we are in a moment. We are in a moment of death and rebirth. We're in a moment where God is once again breathing his Spirit on his church and on his people. And I do not want to miss it. I don't know about you, but I don't want to do life without the breath of the Spirit. I don't want to do family without the breath of the Spirit. I don't want to do business without the breath of the Spirit. And I really don't want to do church without the breath of the Spirit. There's no substitute for the wind of God blowing on these dry bones. And if you're here and you're looking out at the Valley of Dry Bones, I get it. Maybe it's because of decisions that were made in your life, mistakes that you made, bad decisions. You chose the ways of the world. For others, maybe it wasn't something you did, it was something that happened to you, things that were outside of your control. That's what sin does. It destroys, it destructs, it makes us hollow and empty, and it doesn't stay with us. It begins to negatively impact people around us. It destroys relationships and families. And it leads to dry bones. But we have a God who knows his way out of the grave.